Hey y'all, today I'm going to show you how to make homemade dinner rolls. And I hear a lot of times people are afraid to make bread, and I see no reason for that. Bread is so easy, and it's so much cheaper to make them than going to the store and buying a batch of rolls already made, because if you have flour, sugar, salt, milk, and butter, and an egg, you can make delicious homemade puffy, buttery rolls. So the first thing you want to start with is I have a cup of milk here. Now, it doesn't matter if it's 2% or whole milk. I wouldn't recommend using skim milk because you need some of that fat. It helps soften the dough. So then you want to add 1/4 of a cup, half a stick of butter. Now make sure this is a heat-safe measuring cup. So you just want to add half the stick of butter, and I usually cut it in a few pieces so that it will melt, because we're going to heat this up so that the butter melts. And I usually microwave it in 30-second to 1-minute intervals, and then stir it so that the butter will melt, but you don't get the mixture too hot. Now then, I'm using a bread maker to knead the dough. You can also do this in a mixer, but the bread maker is easiest for me because you can do other stuff while the dough is kneading. So I have in the bread, you want to get the bread maker pan out and make sure the little kneader bar is in there, because I have had that happen where it's not in there and it's not doing anything, and it's because there's no kneader bar. So first you want to put in there 1 teaspoon of just regular salt. I keep my salt in a little bowl like this so I don't over measure. There's nothing worse than getting too much salt and then trying to get it out. And then you want to add 1/4 cup of just regular granulated sugar. Then we're going to add the milk mixture to this pan once it gets heated up, and then we'll add flour. Now I have gone through and tried expensive flours, cheap flours, all different kinds of flour, and I am using a store brand bleached all-purpose flour. It gives you excellent results, and it's cheap. So this has been in there for a minute. Now the butter has started to melt, so I'm just going to stir that up a little bit, and it's going to need another minute because the butter isn't quite melted yet. Now, something I forgot to get out is an instant read thermometer, because you want to make sure that the milk mixture isn't too hot when you add it to the pan, because you can kill yeast that way. Now I'm going to talk about yeast here. Yeast is very expensive to buy it in the little packets or the little jars at your grocery store. So I like to buy it in the large packages at a restaurant supply store. You can even get it at Sam's Club, and I keep it in a container like this. This is instant yeast. This is not active dry yeast. You do not need to proof this before you want to use it. You can just add it with your dry ingredients, and it gives great results. If you're using active dry yeast, you don't need to proof it either, but it will take about twice the amount of time to rise when you are going to shape the rolls and have them rise to get them ready to bake. I'm going to check the milk mixture again just to make sure, and it's starting to melt, and the butter will continue to melt as you stir it. Now this milk mixture got very hot, so we're going to let that cool off for a minute. But if your mixture gets too hot, so I'm going to test it with my thermometer. Oh yes. It's very hot, about 160 degrees. So I usually then just add it to the pan, and it will cool off in the pan. And it will also then help dissolve the salt and the sugar. And then you can test it again. And when you add it to the pan, it's already dropped about 30 degrees. It's at about 135. So it's great if you heat it up too much, like I did. So now you want to add all-purpose flour to the milk mixture. And the most accurate way I've found to measure flour is in your container. Stir up the flour just a little bit, and then just scoop up a cup, and then just level the top off with a knife. And there you have 1 cup of flour. So we're going to be putting in here 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour. But something that I like to do, and you can do this too, is I like to substitute 1 cup of the all-purpose flour for whole wheat flour. This gives it a great taste and texture, and I just measure this the same way. And it also gives them a pretty color. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. But it's a great way to use up, if you have whole wheat flour, to use it up. Now I'm just going to add 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour, so we get the full 3 3/4 of a cup. Alright, so we have our flour in there. Now we want to add the yeast. So you want 1 package of active or instant yeast. So I'm just going to add 2 1/4 teaspoons. That's how much is in one of those little packages. And then you want to add 1 egg. And it will combine with the rest of the ingredients best if it's beaten. So I usually just put it in a little bowl, or I'll put it in my measuring cup after I've measured out the milk and the water, and I just beat it up a little bit and then dump it right in there. Now that's all there is to it. So then I'm just going to put it in the bread maker and put it on the dough cycle, and we're almost there to delicious homemade rolls. Now you want to monitor the dough during the beginning of the cycle to make sure if it's too wet or too dry. Depending on the humidity and other conditions, the exact kind of flour you're using, if you measured a little too much milk, a little less milk, the size of your egg, it will affect the overall texture of the dough. Don't be scared of this. You can simply just adjust it, but it's easier to adjust it in the beginning than it is later. So I usually just look and see the ingredients are coming together well, and sometimes I just scrape down the sides of the pan with a spatula. You don't have to do that. I'm just particular. So I'm just waiting for the dough to come together. And you usually will know in the first few minutes if it's going to be too wet or too dry. If it will not stick together, then you want to add a tablespoon of warm milk, about a teaspoon at a time, because if you add too much, you can get really gloppy dough. Or if it's too wet, add flour, a 1/4 cup extra, 1/4 to a 1/2 cup, a tablespoon at a time, and it should even itself out. This dough is coming together great. It will need no adjustments, and it's easier to make dough in the wintertime because there's less humidity in the air, and you're going to have less risk of the dough being too sticky or not coming together, because the more humidity, the less water or milk flour is going to absorb. So we are going to wait for this to get done, and then I'm going to share with you how to shape the rolls, and that is going to be no problem at all. You just wait till your bread maker is done, and then you join me back here so I can show you how to shape these into any shape you want to. Alright, so my bread maker just went off, and we're going to shape the dough into dinner rolls. So just take the dough out, and you want to make sure your work surface is clean, and just take a little bit. You don't need a lot. Just a little bit of flour and dust it. The more flour you use, it's going to interfere with shaping, and they're not going to shape into a nice dinner roll shape. That's the easiest way to explain it. So I just kind of push the flour on the work surface, and then get in there, get the dough out of the pan, get it all off the little kneader bar. Alright, so we have our dough. I usually like to just kind of shape it in a round disc shape, not a ball, just kind of round. And then you want to cut it in half. Like this. Now then you're going to cut each half into 8 pieces. So you want 16 dinner rolls total. So I usually then just stretch it out into kind of a log shape. You can roll it a little bit, just gently. You don't want to handle the dough too much because if you knead dough after it's first rising, it can be tough and mess with the structure of the dough, and it will not give you a nice finished product. So I usually just start then by cutting it in half, and then cutting each half into half until you end up with 8 pieces. You can even get kind of creative with it and cut them all different ways if you want, by going different directions with the bench scraper. Now, I didn't mention this, but this is an excellent tool for shaping lots of different kind of bread dough. It's great for scraping off your work surface, and it's especially great for cutting up dough like this, even for cinnamon rolls, dinner rolls, dividing dough for multiple loaves of bread. It's excellent for that. You can find it at kitchen stores. I haven't been able to find them as easily as I used to be able to. They also have them online, but indispensable for all different kinds of things. They're also great when you're chopping vegetables. You can pick them up and then put the chopped vegetables in a pan or anywhere else you need them. So I have my second then roll of dough. Just going to kind of do the same thing, and then just cut it in half, and then keep cutting each half in half. All right, now we're going to put these in the baking pan. You want to have 2 8-inch cake pans. If you do not have 8-inch cake pans, you can use 9-inch cake pans. However, the rolls will not be as tall and puffy. They'll be kind of squattier, and I don't like the looks of them. And they're easier to judge how much they've risen in a smaller cake pan than a larger one. So you just want to lightly spray this with cooking spray. And now, I'm going to show you my little ingenious way how to shape these. Take a ball of dough, and this is why you don't want a lot of flour in your work surface, because the dough will not stick to itself to form a dinner roll shape. So flatten down a little bit, like this, and then using your thumbs, pull the outside edges to the center, and keep pulling them to the center until when you flip it over, the top is nice and smooth. And then just kind of pinch the center. And that's also why you want to keep the dough. You don't want too dry of a dough, because you need a soft, supple dough to kind of work with. And I usually put 8 in a pan, and I put 1 in the center and then 7 around the outside of the one in the center. So I'm going to do that over here just to mark it. So then you can put the 7 around the outside. And it's just pulling the edges towards the center and pinching. Just pinch the dough until then you kind of get a nice point in all the edges. You're not going to have any creases. You have a smooth top. And then just stick that right there in the pan. And then you just continue to do this until there's no more balls of dough left, no more pieces of dough. All right, now from this point on, after you shape all of the rolls and you get them in the pan, you want to cover them with a towel and put them in a warm spot. I have a light tea towel that works great for covering them. You do not want to put them in too warm of a spot, because if you do, the outsides will dry out and then it will get a crust on them and they can't rise. So the best place in our house is underneath the under-counter lighting. That stays about 80 degrees. It's an excellent spot to let dough rise. You can also put them, if it's chilly in your house, in your oven with a pan of boiling water, and close the door. You don't need to turn the oven on and let them rise. They'll take about an hour, anywhere from half an hour to an hour and a half to rise, depending on your conditions. Don't rush them, give them time. And when they're fully risen, you'll know, because if you poke one, the indentation will remain. Like now, if we poke it, the indentation doesn't remain. All right, so I'm going to continue shaping these, and then we'll be back when we get ready to bake them. And we're back. So our rolls have risen. Now, when you poke them with your finger, the indentation remains. Now, it did spring back a little bit. You don't want to let them rise until the indentation fully remains, because then they're going to rise more in the oven, and they're going to rise too much, and they will fall. And when dough falls in the oven, it is very coarse and dry. So as long as they're puffed out and they're touching, they've risen enough to be baked. So I've melted 4 tablespoons of butter. Now that might seem excessive, so you can cut that back to 2 tablespoons if you would like. And you can use margarine in these rolls if you'd like to, if you're trying to cut costs, which there isn't much difference when using margarine. And if you find it necessary, by all means do it. So you just want to brush the rolls lightly with the butter. And if you're using the 4 tablespoons, you can brush them liberally. This is going to give them that delicious brown crust and give them that flavor, that moistness. When you get rolls at a restaurant, they're slathered in lots of butter. So if you want rolls like you get out, then I suggest brushing them with excessive amounts of butter. And let it run down between the rolls. Alright, now I preheated the oven to 375 degrees, and these bake best with the rack in the lower middle position. So it's not in the middle, it's the level below that. So I'm going to put these in there, and you want to bake them for 12 to 14, sometimes 16, just depending on exactly your rolls. So I'm just going to put them in there. But I usually put them in for about 12 or 14 and then check them. And if they're not quite brown enough, then you can bake them longer. Alright, so the timer just went off. And these were in here for 13 minutes at 375. I don't remember if I mentioned that. And they're lightly golden brown. They're a little firm on the outside. Any more and they're going to be dry. You don't want to overbake them. So then right when they come out, we had the leftover butter. You don't have to do this, but if you do, they're delicious. Brush them with more butter. And when they're hot like this, it's going to absorb it really quickly. And it's going to give you that soft, tender crust. I mean, how beautiful do those look? We're going to pop these then out of the pan, put them on a cooling rack. Now they're going to be a little hot, but you know, you want to serve them piping hot. Nothing is better than sopping up gravy with a roll. You know, they're excellent with any meal. Don't just think of them for a holiday. Use them anytime. You know, I have made millions of these rolls in my lifetime because they're so simple and they're so good. I'm going to get a rack and then we're going to pop those out of the pan just so you can see what they look like. They are so beautiful. Look at those. Look at those. And then when you pull them apart, they're all steaming. The smell is amazing. They're weedy. You have those tender layers. I mean, why buy store-bought rolls ever again when you can have those come out of your own oven? And you can take all the credit for it. You can say, I made rolls. Thank you very much for watching this video today, and I encourage you to please go to your kitchens, pull out your ingredients, and make some rolls. Your family will thank you for it.